Good morning. My name is Matt Crocker. I run the McKinnon poll at the Susan McKinnon Foundation. So for those who don't know, Susan McKinnon Foundation is a large philanthropic organisation focused on improving politics, public policy and government. The McKinnon poll, which is my program, is one of the flagship programs at SMF and designed to do high quality, non-partisan, non-advocacy research to help policymakers better understand public opinion and to help the public have a better voice in the policy making process. This is now the 8th poll we've done through a program that's been running over 3 years. Each time we use JWS Research and John Scale as our pollster. In my view, John's one of the best pollsters in the country and has also been doing the research for UA in their Universities Matter project. So I'll give John a chance to introduce himself.
Yeah, good morning. John Scales, I'm the founder of JWS Research. So this is my 4th decade of research since my early 20s, but it's been a great relationship we've had with Susan McKinnon over the last couple of years. And this next piece of research we're going to show you some extracts for is one of the highlights of that. And we're just going to take you through an extract of some of the results. We will give you a link at the end of the slides to the full report, so don't worry about needing to take notes or take pictures if you don't mind. You can see the full report online. Susan McKinnon's very transparent with their research and reporting. Online you'll find the report, you'll find the detailed data cross tables, you'll find the questionnaire, you'll find everything about the survey, and then you'll be welcome to follow up with any questions you have after you've even been through that as well. So thanks, Matt.
And very happy to share the original data set too for people who want to look into it in more detail. So this poll that we've done is on partisanship, polarisation and social cohesion. Each time we do an opinion poll, we pick a different topic every time and usually try and find something where there is a genuine social concern and kind of a sense that sometimes policymakers don't necessarily understand where the community is at on issues. So this one came from a conversation that I had with Assistant Treasurer Andrew Lee, who raised this as an issue, and we think it's some important research which is really, really timely. So I'll go to our methodology first. So every time we use the same approach. We start off with a series of depth interviews with experts in the field, so it's not Matt or John's views about what the right questions are, but we generally try and ground ourselves in the expert experience. We then do a series of focus groups and then follow up with a big 3,000 sample national survey. The good thing about the size of the survey size is both you get really good and accurate data at that national level, but you can also break down the research into particular cohorts and groups, which gives you extra insights as well. At Susan McKinnon Foundation, one of the things we care about is political leadership. So we started off this survey with a question about the qualities that people wanted to see in Australia's political leaders. And interestingly, the thing that came out top of the list was honesty and ethical behaviour. In one sense, it's a low bar that we set for our political leaders. We just want them to be honest and ethical, but also gives a kind of sense about what's important to the community. The other two that came out really strongly are respect for taxpayers' money and having a plan for the future. So you had 57% of people who had honesty in their top 3. Respect for taxpayers' money was 37, and having a plan for the future was 37. And everything else sits in a category beneath that. We asked some questions about trust in democratic institutions. So the ones which were interesting at the top of the list with high levels of trust, you had the electoral commissions that run our elections, so the Australian Electoral Commission and state and territory electoral commissions. They had 45% people saying that they had complete and high trust, and another 35% saying that they had moderate trust too. So we presented these results to Tom Rogers, the Australian Electoral Commissioner, and he was pretty pleased with the outcome there. Democracy also gets a similar number as the way we choose our governments, and then it drops away pretty quickly from there. So we were pretty surprised that with courts and the justice system, you had more people who said that they had low or no trust than had high trust. And then government, state and federal had 23% trust and 35% distrust, and politicians and political leaders are all the way down the bottom of the list, with 11% trust and 54%, so more than half of the population saying that they had low or no trust in our political leaders. And what's interesting here is we've just taken that data and broken it down by gender, and we've broken it down by generation too. So the two bars on the left of these are men and women, so men in the teal and women in the maroon, and there is a massive gap between men and women across each of these questions, from electoral commissions to democracy, through to governments and politicians. So there's clearly something going on here, and you see this in current political research as well, and in the US too, that there is an increasing gap between how men and women think about our electoral system and our institutions. The other thing that's interesting here, for electoral commissions and democracy, the older you are, the more trust you have in the system. But for our institutions, the younger you are, the more trust you have in that system. So not that we should be celebrating 17 and 16% trust for our political leaders, but for that at least those numbers for younger people are better than the 3% we have for older people. Some questions about a democratic system. On the positive side, we had 61% of people who said compulsory voting improves the quality of democracy. So there's really strong support for the great Australian innovation of forcing people to vote. And impressively, 58% of people believe that their vote makes a difference. So that kind of sense about people value the democratic process, they value their right to vote, and that they feel it makes a difference to the outcome in their lives. On the more negative side, 6 in 10 people said that they felt that corruption is a problem in Australian politics, which is clearly a concern on the perception that's out there, despite all the work that's been done on corruption commissions and integrity measures at both the state and federal level over decades now. There is now that kind of entrenched view that corruption is an issue. And both extreme right views and extreme left views were seen as a serious threat to democracy. So you had 53% and 51% of people strongly or somewhat agreeing to that. But what's interesting, if you have a look here, is we broke down those numbers based on how people self-selected themselves as to whether they were left and progressive, centre and moderate, and right and conservative. And there's in the sample, about 600 people in the left group, about 620 in the right group, and about 1,200 in that centre group. So the centre group is the biggest group. But the people on the left were generally the ones who said that extreme right views are a serious threat to our country, and the people on the right were the ones that said extreme left views were a serious threat to our country. So we kind of have a sense that there are people on both sides of the kind of polarisation fence who are pointing the finger at the others, but clearly the group in the middle still has a pretty serious concern about both extreme left and extreme right views. This next one is my favourite slide in the entire pack. We asked people to rate political parties based on whether they were moderate or extreme, respectful or disrespectful, unifying or divisive, and a source of true and credible information, and a source of false and misleading information. So the way to read this, the top line is what people said about the party that they didn't vote for. The bottom line is what they said about the party that they did vote for. So everybody thinks that everyone else is more extreme, more disrespectful, more divisive, and a greater source of false and misleading information than they are. If you look at the top section, the Greens voters are the only ones who say that they are more extreme rather than moderate in their position. And our friends at One Nation, they thought they were the most respectful, the most unifying, and the greatest source of false and misleading information, and everyone else disagreed with them. But the kind of key point here is that we can't all be right. Everybody else can't be terrible. And this kind of sense about how we're blaming each other for the challenges is an increasing problem. So with that, in the spirit of collaboration, I might hand over to John to do the second half of the slides.
Thanks, Matt. It was actually interesting when we presented these results to parliamentarians and we're presenting to a Greens senator, and they actually thought that the fact that Greens voters see themselves as being more extreme than moderate was actually a badge of honour. So, okay, I'm going to get into the segmentation we did and the results of that. So to set the base for that, we asked some questions about their friendships, and so we asked the question around to what extent you agree or disagree with these statements. And you'll see at the top there, if someone with political views very different to mine was in need, I would help them. 67% agree with that. But then we get varying levels of agreement, disagreement with a whole range of statements. I would never be able to marry someone with very different political views to mine. I'd not be happy if a loved one married someone with very different political views to mine, I would not be friends with people with very different political views to mine. So these came from some stuff we'd done in our desk research analysis to inform the project around some of these metrics in the states. And in the states, it's a much more binary system of Republic versus Democrat, and you see much more. You don't see as much middle ground on these sorts of questions. So, but we do get this sense of there's a bit of dynamism in these numbers. What was the next interesting thing is we asked people their attitudes to a whole range of what we called sort of their views on undemocratic practices, such as sending threatening or intimidating messages to someone with different views online. So you'll see at the top there, there's 14% said they support that. And we asked it as we asked the question as, would you support any of the following activities to advance a cause that you that you care about? So we're asking it with a confirmation bias to saying it's okay to say you would do this. And we had at least 1 in 10 or more agree to all of these things. So sending threatening or intimidating messages to someone with different views, sending threatening or intimidating messages to members of parliament, encouraging or using violence, vandalising or damaging private property, lying or misleading the public, preventing people, and the last one there, preventing people from accessing buildings, facilities, or blocking traffic roads as part of an organised protest. There's more support for that, and we found, and we've done other research here for the government around, for Home Affairs actually on this, and there's a fairly high tolerance for protest in Australia as long as it doesn't sort of get in the way of the peaceful activities of other people going to work or going about their lives. So you get a higher support for that, but it does raise the concern around there's some support for a whole range of practices which like sending threatening or intimidating messages to members of parliament it shows that there's an amount of lack of confidence and respect for the system and authority here. And it's interesting when we break these numbers down by who thinks that, the biggest splits we had was by the generational differences. So you see that there's much higher support, 1 in 3 or so, or 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 of Gen Z and millennials here. So the real clear gap between millennials and Gen X is here. So we're showing here that these views are much more supported by the younger folk who who basically have the view that they are not represented by the system and institutions by which our lives are governed. The next thing we did was we took all of that and we'd also asked people. Matt referred to the question about people self-assessing, left progressive, centre moderate, right conservative. We asked those as 2 separate questions, and there's a high correlation between people saying that they're left and they're progressive, centre and moderate, right and conservative. And we did a flag analysis to identify those who the correlation of those questions that we just asked, plus the ones about family friendships, and we identified these 3 groups. So the non-outliers of those 3 groups: the left, progressive, centre, moderate, right, conservatives. And as Matt said, the centre and moderate equals the sum of the 2 parts on the side. But we also had this group, about more than 1 in 6 people who we classified as outliers, because that's where we saw this group. They split on the data in lots of ways, and there was the group within them we called the extreme outliers. So they defined as strongly supporting or agreeing to 4 of the 10 overall statements. The detail of how the analysis is done is in the full report, so I'd recommend you have a look at that if you want to know the detail of that. But the interesting thing is then when, who are those people? So as you would guess from the profile of questions which gave you, there's an over-indexing of those moderate and extreme outliers amongst millennials. They're also, for the reason that they're younger, also tend to be more metro. They also tend to be more university educated. The centre and moderate and right and conservatives tend to be not university educated, and that actually ties with who our primary audience for the Universities Matter campaign is. They tend to be more centre, moderate, right and conservative people, because they're not uni educated, non-aspirational potentially for their children as well. That's the sort of demographic mix of them. There's a whole bunch of other attitudinal questions, including voting. So the moderate outliers and extreme outliers tend to be Greens voters, based partly on their younger profile, more likely over-indexing and voting yes to the referendum. They more likely to have a slight, or the moderate outliers have a slight to no sense of belonging in Australia, whereas the extreme outliers don't over-index there because they have much better affiliations online. And a couple of other things to pick out there. The people, the centre and moderate are socially and politically not so engaged as anybody else, and that's particularly important to come when we're talking about the election coming up now, because those people really won't be paying much attention to what's going on now. They'll just be living their lives, and they probably won't tune into the federal election, whatever happens, until the last week, for some of them possibly on election day. The left and progressives tend to be over-indexing on being heavy online users. The extreme outliers are more likely to think that Australia is extremely divided, although other people would say they're the ones who are being divisive. The extreme outliers are more likely to be socially isolated and anxious, and also more like the outliers tend to be more, they feel unwelcome and unsafe in society, and they also have experienced conflict due to their different opinions as well. So there's a strong sense there in this group of 1 in 6 or more people that the society's not working for them. They're prepared to do things outside the norm, as it were, and feel unrepresented by the systems that govern them. It's interesting here. We looked at the media consumption. So imagine you get an issue reported. Take the one issue and how it gets reported. So the left and progressive group, they have an over-index. The main source of news and information for them is ABC or SBS TV news. The centre and moderates and right and conservatives tend to view local and Australian commercial TV news, and the outliers tend to have a higher indexation on social media. So the one issue, this is part of why in the world we're in, compared to a decade or two ago, probably 2 decades ago, we're more divided in some ways because everyone receives the same information in different ways, reported differently by different outlets and platforms. The concerning thing for us is, this is just to wrap with a few final questions. The concerning thing here was we asked people to choose between, what's best between democracy being preferable to any other kind of government, even if those I disagree with get elected. So, I'm okay with democracy and I accept someone else didn't vote for being elected, so I'm happy to live within the tent on that. Or, under some circumstances, an authoritarian government can be preferable to a democratic one. Now, the moderate and extreme outliers start to get ambivalent on that, and some of them choose tyranny over democracy. So that is in itself a concern. And the other interesting thing here is that of our centre and moderate people, those disengaged people with democratic institutions, 1 in 4 of them, so I can't say, I don't know. In fact, when you talk to them in the focus groups, they actually don't quite understand the democratic process. They get confused by it. They think that governments control our preferences. They think it's all probably corrupt anyway, and their vote doesn't really matter like they as much as they think it should. And they sit there on questions like this, so it's a pretty fundamental question about whether we should live in a democracy or a tyranny. And 1 in 4 of them just go, I don't know. I can't tell you. I can't answer the question even. We asked people a question about how divided we are on key political, economic, and social issues. So 27% say we're extremely or very divided. 14% say we're not divided. And 50% say somewhat divided. That's not so bad. I'm not too surprised by that figure. But when we ask people how divided you are compared to 5 years ago, we have majorities saying we're more divided than we were 5 years ago. Now, that's a perceptual question about their self-assessment of division. We don't have the idea would be to have the data from 5 years ago and compare that to now in a tracking process, in a tracking sense. But that's a concern in its own right, that we're more divided than not. And the view is we're getting more divided as we go along. And then we ask the question, should government take further action to address the extreme views and intolerance in our community? 72% agree something needs to be done. And of course, what needs to be done will be different for different people, but there is an overwhelming view that something needs to be done. The strongly agree figure there is higher than the somewhat agree figure. So people are looking for action from government. On social cohesion. When we ask them what needs to be done, what are the most effective ways to address extreme views or intolerance in our community, there's a range of things there. We gave people multiple choice. 9 in 10 chose one or more of these things. Nothing got majority. This is the other thing. If you're going to do something about it, there's no low-hanging fruit there. There's no one thing that flicks it. There's no silver bullet that fixes these problems in society. The most common response was the 42% saying stronger laws to allow police to prosecute people who go too far. We had stronger laws on social media companies to stop extreme content going viral, early intervention programs, better education, more support for local community events. And that really splits when you look at it by those segments as well and by demographics. So there's no single answer here. The good thing here is, and I'll finish up on this, this is what research is about for us. So I sometimes get referred to as a pollster, and when people think about polls, they think about a news poll or a Resolve or an Essential poll, that sort of thing, about measuring where things are at. We do research to work out how to change things. So for us, this forms the basis of understanding where we're at now and considering what changes might you need to do to help address the situation and improve social cohesion. This would be a starting point. The next step would be to potentially do further research and test out specific ideas, programmatic events, etc., as to what might bring that together and what's needed to make a shift. So, and that's sort of what we're doing at the Universities Matter campaign as well, understanding what the perceptual barriers are to perceptions about universities, and then over time, sort of moving the dial to get people to appreciate the benefits of universities to society more broadly than just for teachers, students and teachers and unis themselves. So that's us. As I said, the full report is on the link here, and we've got 5 minutes left, and we'd be more than happy to take any questions that people have. Otherwise, if you don't, I've got a couple more slides I could talk you to. Any questions that anyone's got? Up here in the middle? Yeah, so the question is, has there been any similar studies to see how things have changed over time? From our point, this is the deepest dive we've had on it. I've done studies like this before. I've done a lot of research for Home Affairs in this space, but I can't provide the comparison here. I'm afraid that's their data. Matt, you got...
And this is the first time we've done it from the Susan McKinnon Foundation point of view as well. But some of the results here we found really surprising, and there were things here that we've looked at and said we want to track this over time from this point forward, particularly those kind of questions around youth engagement and that kind of level of anger from the kind of younger population too. Interesting to know if that's a point in time thing for the moment and whether that gets better or worse over time. So we're keen to do more on that.
We did have some questions in here in the full, we don't make comparison in the full report because it's not apples with apples, but we did take some cues here out of some stuff have been done in other constituencies, including the US as well. So yeah.
So I have 2 questions here on the iPad.
Oh, okay.
And they're for you. So what should universities take away from these findings? And what is the most promising trend you've seen for universities?
I've got to take my cynical hat off here, don't I? What's the first question?
What should universities take away from these findings? And maybe just to give, I guess, some context from my perspective here, I think the valuable thing that universities have is you have all of these young people who are there at university who are studying and engaged with the work of universities. And I think one of the challenges here is how do we get that kind of sense of civic engagement through our younger people, and universities have a clear role in playing at least a small part in making sure people are engaged with those kind of broader civic and community issues.
Yeah, I mean, this shows there is a problem, and problems only get worse when you ignore them, and so you're best to confront those problems and deal with them yourselves. And yeah, as Matt says, a lot of these perceived problems around the way people engage with and feel engaged with society and its institutions are amongst your student audiences will be a key part of that. And history shows that if you don't confront your problems and solve them yourself, someone else will step in and do that for you. And we're seeing that. I mean, and this is what we're fighting against with the Universities Matter campaign is trying to talk to people about the benefits of universities to them, even those who don't go to uni, not aspirational. There's this counter tide of people seeing some of the views coming out of universities that they're not agreeing with, and they're calling on governments to do something about that. So it is a case of you need to confront your issues, or someone will confront them for you. That's the risk we have. What's the second question?
You've just answered it.
There you go.
So the other question I have here is: were parliamentarians receptive of the data to inform their views on whether or not our society is socially cohesive? So I think we've now done this presentation about 60 times, I think. And and the great thing about going up to Parliament House with some opinion polling, if you walk around and wave an opinion poll, everybody's interested in what you have to say. So we've been really impressed on the kind of engagement with the issues. It's clearly an issue of concern. I think we briefed Home Affairs 4 times on this data, and we know it's been used and informed some work on the government side of things.
Yeah, I mean, we briefed it right across Parliament, all sides, all parties, all Teals, Greens, Liberal, Labor, Nats, everybody. Our departments like Home Affairs and others, we briefed the party administrations as well on this stuff. So everyone's seen it. I mean, sometimes to get change, though, it takes someone to take up the cudgel, doesn't it? It takes someone to actually have the courage to think through it and take something to the Parliament. And legislation is not the only way to fix these things as well. There's responsibility on others as well. So because the low bar here for parliaments is typically to do something where they just regulate, they go towards the most common response there, the one with stronger laws to allow police to prosecute people who go too far. That's the one that's the least political risk for anyone for parliaments here. So if it's not done some other way. And probably not likely to be done in the current environment until we get through this federal election and get to another term with a new government of whatever nature that is. It's also, obviously, it's not something, as I said earlier, there's no silver bullet here. You're not going to solve it overnight. It takes long term, and for a parliament or a government to take it up, they need time. It's as good an argument as any to give parliaments 4-year terms to give them the time to actually do the hard work.
And I think that's the value of this kind of work here, is that we can at least help government and MPs understand the issues, and then they can look at what they can do to solve them. Yeah,
and I'll take a question at the front here. The good thing here is governments don't normally do this research, and members of Parliament don't get this. They would never see anything like this or any other Susan McKinnon polling gets done, and they make it available to everybody. Question here, Damien?
Your data shows that people who have more extremist views get their news from social media. Which members in social media get the extreme view and they seek out social media?
Not from this data, no. I suspect it's a chicken and egg thing. People have. I think my view on it, from not just this research but over time, is people have always had the views and itching about their views, and we might consider it an extreme view, but they find friends online they might not have found otherwise. You might live in outback Queensland, but you might find a friend online in outback WA or at Adelaide that you would never have found otherwise, and so they can't coalesce and come together and have a conversation and create their own echo chamber for their thoughts. Yeah, we're out of time. Is there any other final questions? There's nothing in this data, and it's a good point around the pandemic and government responses to that. But there's new things taking over from that. There's a whole new. We're now getting to the point where the pandemic is largely behind us, and there's a new society evolving, and you'll see through the data, we are getting a rising trend. It was in Queensland, it's in Victoria now. This rising trend of views around crime and violence, and some of that is from people who are disaffected by pandemic, but there's this whole youth crime thing that's going on, and it might have been caused by the pandemic, but it's an issue that's just growing and getting worse at the moment. Sorry? Yeah, and Middle Australia, those centre moderate people who just want to, who are the most proportionally the largest group, they just want to get on with their lives. So they don't want to go to bed thinking, is my car going to get stolen? They want to be able to go shopping and not worry, are they going to get carjacked on the way to and from their car in the supermarket. You know,
And having done a lot of these polls and questions now, they're not unusual, these kind of answers. When you ask people these questions, you generally get like a stronger law, we want government to do something, is generally the response you get. And it says people who just want to get on with their lives and they say government should fix this problem. I'm annoyed about it, please do something
yeah,
about
I
it.
can't fix it. Someone knows, and put it on government and policing. So, yeah. All right, thank you.
Great,
We're out of
thank you.
time. Thanks for your time.